Hey everybody, it's May 7th, 2026. Let's talk about the Gulf of Oman, because just yesterday morning at 9:00 a.m. Eastern Time, a U.S. Navy F-18 Super Hornet screamed off the flight deck of the USS Abraham Lincoln. It locked onto an Iranian-flagged oil tanker called the MT Hasna that was running the American blockade hard, trying to break through it. It ignored every warning the U.S. Navy threw at it. They had every chance to not get shot, but they got rewarded with a surgical burst from a 20mm Vulcan Gatling cannon from the F-18 straight through the ship's rudder. Disabled, stopped cold. CENTCOM's official statement was controlled and calm. Hasna is no longer transiting to Iran. Yeah, that's one way to put it. They're not really transiting anywhere at this point. But what was Iran's response? This is where it gets hilarious. Parliament Speaker Mohammad Galaba, one of Thrawn's actual supposed peace negotiators, posted social media messages warning Iranians to brace for economic hardship and called thriftiness a missile that people can fire into the heart of the enemy. That's what the crushing blow looks like from the other side of the ledger right now. They're like, yeah, they took down our oil tanker with an F-18. Let's just be thrifty. That's what will fight against us losing $500 million a day. Meanwhile, President Trump told reporters that the talks recently have been very good and that a deal is possible with Iran, while also posting on Truth Social that if Iran doesn't agree, the bombing resumes at a much higher level and intensity than what it was at before. Basically, carrot in one hand and then the U.S. Abraham Lincoln in the other. Carrot and stick, but in this case, the stick is the USS Abraham Lincoln supercarrier. And then this is the exact quote from CENTCOM. They said U.S. forces operating in the Gulf of Oman enforced blockade measures by disabling an Iranian-flagged unladen oil tanker attempting to sail towards an Iranian port at 9:00 a.m. Eastern Time. May 6th, U.S. Central Command observed the MT Hasna as it transited international waters en route to an Iranian port on the Gulf of Oman. American forces issued multiple warnings and informed the Iranian flag vessel it was in violation of the blockade. After the Hasna's crew failed to comply with repeated warnings, U.S. forces disabled the tanker's rudder by firing several rounds from the 20mm cannon gun of a U.S. Navy F-18 Super Hornet launched from the USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72. Hasna is no longer transiting to Iran. Yeah, that's one way to put it. The U.S. blockade against ships attempting to enter or depart Iranian ports remains in full effect. CENTCOM forces continue to act deliberately and professionally to ensure compliance. No big deal. But we just busted out our 20mm cannon to give you just a nice little reminder that the blockade is still in effect. But here's what I want you to lock onto about this entire engagement. The M61A2 Vulcan cannon that hit the Hasna's rudder fires at up to 6,600 rounds per minute. That's 110 rounds per second. And firing the gun on one of these fighter jets, to me, it's basically a spiritual experience. So you do what's called track, shoot, track. So track means you're pushing forward slightly on the stick, and then you fire by squeezing. But you want to have a little bit of forward pressure so that as you fire, you don't pull up the nose of the aircraft and spray and pray the rounds somewhere where they're not supposed to go. And then you track again, which means you hold the pipper is what it's called. That's the little dot that helps you fire upon whatever the target is. You hold it right there to keep the rounds centered and surgical on exactly where you want them to go. And then you hear this like a very amazing, again, a spiritual sound hearing, that gunfire right next to your head. It's just amazing. 6 rotating barrels, each one cycling independently, so no single barrel overheats. CENTCOM said that several rounds, that's a controlled likely half-second to 1-second burst to disable the 300-plus foot oil tanker. That is just an insane operation. Imagine being in the cockpit of that F-18. Literally a dream sortie for that fighter pilot. But this is what a pilot does best, striking these moving targets, striking moving boats that are small or large. So we've talked before about striking those Iranian fast boats, but now we're seeing that these F-18s can be unleashed on these larger oil tankers as well. And using the F-18 as the surgical scalpel is an incredible way to back up this blockade itself. This isn't random either. It's basically a level of precision that takes years of training and skill. And you basically build this skill over the course of years. And now we've got dozens of fighter pilots blasting off of the USS Abraham Lincoln, as well as up to 200 U.S. fighter jets from the U.S. Air Force, with fighter pilots that are trained to do this exact thing. So if these fighter pouts from the Navy and the Air Force are further unleashed on these oil tankers or these fast attack boats, literally the mosquito fleet of Iran could go away like that. But it just depends on if that's the tactics and strategy of the administration. But remember, all of these different platforms, they sync up multiple platforms talking to each other, pumping information in real time to help every other fighter jet target whatever it needs to. But before we get into the sensor stack and the platforms that made that shot exactly possible, you need to know the full scope of the operational picture because the Hosma intercept doesn't exist in isolation. It's the latest chapter in the 68 days of the most intense U.S. naval and Air Force enforcement action since the Cold War. Let's walk the tape from the beginning because context here means everything. So Operation Epic Fury now has entered the stage where fighter jets are unleashed on Iranian fast attack boats, also on these larger oil tankers. So right now, it's a maritime equivalent of a hard stop. No tankers, no containers, no LNG, liquid natural gas for you acronym lovers. The waterway right there typically moves 20% of the world's consumption of oil, and now that's gone dark. And that really is a big deal for Iran, obviously, but more so for China. China being cut off from this, they're seeing their economy go into decline. Lots of economies are going into decline. So obviously a deal being made is going to be the best situation. But a deal being made means having a big stick and walking well, not walking exactly softly. Having a big stick and firing your 20mm cannon to get Iran to the table to actually create some sort of a deal that allows this conflict to wind down. But on April 8th, that ceasefire went into effect. But there's been lots of many violations of that ceasefire is what I would call it. And now we're at a point where supposedly Iran has a blockade. And on May 4th, when Project Freedom launched, that was SICOM's force package that was backed up by the USS Truckton and USS Mason. Those were two Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyers. They transited the strait under a sustained Iranian barrage, basically firing at these ships multiple times from coastal cruise missile-based launchers. But right now, more than 100 aircraft are right there, right over that red, white, and blue dome, over the Strait of Hormuz, doing what's likely continuous overwatch. We know we've got 15,000 American service members that are right there in the naval blockade itself, focused on the Strait of Hormuz. Iran shot at those escorts with cruise missiles, drones, and small boats, as well as shooting at UAE. And then CENTCOM Admiral Brad Cooper a couple days ago confirmed the strikes on the 6 fast attack boats. He said, "We have an enormous amount of capability and firepower concentrated in and around the strait, including the AH-64 Apache and MH-60 Seahawk helicopters." Basically saying, yeah, the U.S. has a massive, and it's not really a, measuring contest because there's nothing that Iran has that they can put up against these helicopters now, the F-18 and the different assets in the area that could actually create some sort of a force that could go up against the U.S. naval blockade. It's just not there. Project Freedom was paused, pinning the Pakistani-mediated diplomacy, and the blockade of the Iranian ports is obviously in full effect, now unleashing fighter jets. I just want to be in one of those cockpits. Anybody else? But then on May 5th, Iranian drones struck the French-owned container vessel CMA-CGM San Antonio, leaving her drifting without power. 8 crew members injured. That attack happened roughly 2 hours before the pause announcement. And now we're finally seeing that France is actually stepping up and sending some naval power to help with something in this raid of formulas. Not exactly sure what they're going to do, but now it's pretty obvious that France can't even remain neutral anymore, with Iran just striking their vessels willy-nilly and basically giving the big middle finger to France. It's said that some French warships are going through the Suez Canal. We'll see what they actually do as they arrive in theater. The UK MTO, wow, that's a beautiful acronym. Well, at least the UK has some great acronyms. And that's the body that tracks maritime incidents in the region, has now logged 46 separate report incidents since February 28th, 26 ship attacks, 18 suspicious activity reports, and 2 ships hijacked likely from IRGC Navy factions. And then May 6, 9 a.m. Eastern Time, the Hasna, Iranian-flagged unladen, and heading for an Iranian port in the Gulf of Oman, gets multiple warnings from U.S. forces, and they ignore every single one. Enter the F-18. Oh, you want to ignore the warnings? Cool, cool, cool. Let us introduce you to the F-18 Super Hornet, likely from Strike Fighter Squadron 151, off USS Abraham Lincoln. That thing launches, it intercepts, and it sets itself up in what's called a wheel. The wheel is the main tactic that fighter jets get into in a close air support or an interdiction or a ship striking mission. They're going to put themselves up in a wheel where they use their targeting pod. That's the advanced camera on the F-18 or the F-15E or the F-16. That is that advanced targeting pod that can look out miles away. Basically see a license plate from miles away, and they're going to lock on with that thing onto the ship's rudder. Then they're going to be in likely a two-ship formation, and they're going to be on different sides of the wheel. And then at that point, they might do multiple bursts from two different jets, or they might just do one burst from a single jet. Either way, we know that a burst from an M61A2 Vulcan cannon went right through the Hasna's rudder. The ship loses steering. The ship stops basically floating adrift. And for the first time in this conflict, a U.S. aircraft has disabled a surface vessel, a major surface vessel by direct fire, to enforce the blockade. So, the Hasna got a crystal clear warning in international waters, and it turns out that crystal clear comes in a 20mm size. So Iran's official position is that none of this matters, and that they haven't even started, and they're doing just fine. Let's look at what's actually happening inside of Iran's decision structures right now, because pretty much this meme sums it all up. We haven't even begun as their Mosquito fleet, and other ships are unable to do anything in the Strait. No moves. Yeah, good job, Iran. You guys are doing just fine. You haven't even begun yet. We know right now that there's basically two structural facts about the Iranian decision-making apparatus that aren't really in the official statements. First, there are real fractures between IRGC hardliners and more moderate government elements, and those fractures make it genuinely difficult for the United States to get a consensus response from Tehran, even when moderates likely want to engage and end this conflict. Second, I had told him a job to Khamenei, Iran's supposed new supreme leader since his father's assassination, early in the conflict is reportedly injured and in hiding. And that's supposedly the guy where Iran needs the ratification of any deal, but he might not be accessible to the people who are trying to negotiate to actually understand how to get in touch with him, and they don't think they can make a decision. So I look at that as like the structural impediment to any agreement at this point, and why this thing is dragging on so long, while Iran is being completely decimated militarily and now economically, and optimism on paper from any of Iran's top leaders can't paper over this fact. And I think it's important for us to remember that Iran's top naval commander was killed during Operation Epic Fury as well. So there's really a fracture within the leadership of the Navy itself, and who's actually in charge of the Strait of Hormuz. We know that at this point, there is not a lot of strength that the IRGC Navy has sending 6-FAX attack craft out there that get absolutely decimated by the U.S. Navy, and now no ability for them to protect any of their ships, because the U.S. just rolled in and struck down that oil tanker's rudder without any contesting from the IRGC. The Super Hornet that stopped the Hasna is one of the links in a kill chain that starts hundreds of miles away and basically forces Iran to see right in their face that they have no more strength and they don't really have any options left. Even though the media might portray it as Iran's in the driver's seat, it just shows having these F-18s now as the surgical weapon, the U.S. Navy and the U.S. Air Force are the new daddy of Iran. And speaking of that daddy, that F-18 Super Hornet, maybe they should call it the F-18 Super Daddy. That's Boeing's twin-engine carrier-based multi-role strike fighter, the backbone of every Navy carrier air wing currently at sea. Yeah, the F-35 is out there as well, but this F-18 is the backbone. That's the specific jet that hit the Hasna, and it blasted off the USS Abraham Lincoln, a Nimitz-class nuclear-powered carrier operating in the Gulf of Oman, alongside the USS George H.W. Bush. It fires 20mm rounds at a switchable rate of 4,000 or 6,000 in the high fire mode per minute in a standard configuration, and that barrel spins at around 6,600 RPM on a burst. The Super Hornet carries 578 rounds in a fully integrated linkless feed system. CENTCOM said several rounds disabled the Hasno's rudder. That means the pilot put a precise short burst into the steering gear of a ship that was the length of 3 football fields from a moving aircraft. But this F-18 can team up with RQ-4 Global Hawks, RQ-170s, and eventually even advanced drones like the Andrew Fury and the AI X-Back. And it really gives it the ability to see everything going on around it. And that moves us to the 4D chess strategic analysis section, because when you team up this naval blockade with air assets from the Navy, air assets from the Air Force, you really have the ability to pressure the regime. And now we're seeing finally some type of pragmatism from the Iranian regime itself, telling their people to be frugal because they're losing $500 million a day. This is a shift that we haven't seen before, and these internal cracks are really starting to show in the Iranian regime, likely making them want to make a deal. Even in their inner circles, they can't show any weakness because as far as they know, one of the other factions in those circles may try to take them out. And that's why they keep showing up as hardline, even though the writing is on the wall that they're going to have to make a deal at some point, or they're all going to go bye-bye. So using Navy fighter pilots flying the F-18, using fighter pilots flying the A-10, F-15E, F-16 for the Air Force, this just shows next-level capability to enforce this blockade on a whole new level. So where do you think things go from here? Do you think more F-18s will be strafing more of these fast attack craft or large oil tankers? Let me know what you think in the comments below. Would love to hear your thoughts. Go and follow me on X, follow me on Instagram. I'm posting there pretty much every day. Join the Max Ready Room. There's a link in the description. You get access to lots of member-only content when you do that. So I'll see you over there in the members-only section. Then watch this next video that pops up right here. I'll see you on that video. This is Ryan, also known as Max Afterburner, signing.